really excited of having this conversation with you. First of all, a short introduction into why are we having this live? Who am I? So my name is Evgeny Lukin. I'm a director for executive education and MBA at Rennes School of Business. Rennes School of Business is one of the top business schools in France, top 10 and top 100 in the world. And what makes this school particularly special is its international exposure. And I think this live session is all about that. We're connecting with Chris on the topic, which is really helping transform organizations across borders. And it's true that at Rennes School of Business, 90% of our professors are international. So including Chris, but also our students. So most of our courses are in English. And myself, I'm more particularly looking after executive education with programs tailored for executives who are looking to upskill themselves in specific areas. On this occasion, we're going to talk about organization design for HR leaders, but this can also be an executive MBA. This can be short program certificates that we are building to accelerate the skills transformation. And with Chris, we've been working for the past year on bringing this exciting topic of strategic organization design to the French professionals who are involved in change initiatives, who are leading HR departments, who are leading learning and development departments, who are business leaders or managers, and who are all facing the same challenge: how to transform an organization and allow it to adapt to a constantly changing environment. So at this point, I would like to, Chris, hand this over to you to let you introduce yourself and introduce maybe your path to strategic organization design. Where did it start? How did you end it there? And why did you stay there for so long?
God. Thanks, Evgeny. Yeah, that's the arc, right? The arc of how I've got to this point. It's. I started out dealing mostly with small groups and teams and things like that, and working in organization development. And as I was working with groups and individuals, it always seemed to me that their effectiveness was constrained a little bit because there were certain things they couldn't do because of a policy or a procedure or a culture that allowed them to do some things but not others. And in the case where they could do some additional things, they sort of weren't allowed to, or there was a constraint to them working. So I started looking up instead of looking down in the organization. And I got connected with strategy. And that's where I did my doctorate in strategy. And then I said, okay, that's very interesting. I know where the organization is going and I can help them figure out a direction. Um, but then there was something in between, and in terms of how do you implement a strategy. So that's what led me to organization design. And then I just started connecting dots. It was strategy and org design and team effectiveness and individual competence and change, and all those things just kind of got put together. So that's the arc. And um, I've just been on kind of a personal, I wouldn't call it a crusade, but I would say I've been trying to help people think about this missing link. Everybody talks about strategy and where we're going, and everybody is concerned about, the workforce and the contribution the workforce makes to value creation in an organization. And there's this missing link in between. So I've been trying to diffuse the idea of org design in organizations and help, in particular, HR. HR is in a unique position to be able to help the organization think about this missing link between strategy and actually creating value for customers and other stakeholders. So that's it. That's how I got started, and I've become quite passionate about this topic. In the United States, in Europe, in Asia, to your point about being international, I've really tried to think about this in a very international way, and been surprised at how common this missing link is for people and how powerful it can be to help organizations be more effective.
Chris, can you tell us a little bit more about also your, you have a quite extensive international experience working with global companies internationally, but also in France. Can you tell some of the experiences that were particularly transformative for yourself as an organization design leader?
Yeah. I would say France for sure, but also broadly in Europe. In France, I did a lot of work with the Électricité de France, EDF. Spent a lot of time working with them as part of their digitalization and their digital transformation. So that was a really exciting project with an organization that's well over 100 years old, and has to keep the lights on for the country, but also has to change with the times. And so the notion of how to help that organization be more flexible, adaptable, and agile as digitalization takes over, I think that was a lot of fun. That was a really good project. I've worked with Adidas in Germany, helping them think through, especially with the human resource function, how do they support Adidas in becoming more flexible in competing against the likes of Nike and some of the other large organizations. Spent a little bit of time with Unilever and Shell in fast-moving consumer goods and energy. So it's just been and then even small organizations, family-run organizations like Brioche Pasquier in Lyon. So it's been a lot of fun. I get to work with lots of different companies with lots of different challenges, and the one common thing that is sort of consistent across is how can you use concepts of org design to facilitate being more flexible or more effective. I think that's the common denominator in all of those.
Common trend. Thank you for that. For those who have attended the organization design workshop that we've run at Merit Summit in Lyon, they already know that about one experience that I was lucky enough to also live by your side at Microsoft during the strategic organization design workshop that you've been doing for now quite a number of years with the University of Southern California Center for Effective Organization. So we touched upon a little bit this topic in Lyon. And so the objective of this webinar is to do what we didn't have time to do in Lyon at Merit Summit, is to go a little bit deeper into what strategic organization design is about, and how can it be helpful for HR leaders to learn this skill to help their companies to transform. Running a bit upfront, just to say that we are organizing this first round of certification, the first workshop in France and Europe in 10 years, on organization design. So this is quite a unique opportunity between two universities, Rennes School of Business and the University of Southern California, to bring what's been a very successful certification, or a successful program in the US, to bring it to Europe, to allow European professionals to participate and learn the org design skill muscle for the in their companies. And just one last word on here is that I can really see the interest growing by a lot for organization design. In France, it's not been for the past years, many years, it was not the big topic in HR. Big topic in HR in France is relations sociales. It's all about dealing with syndicates and labor law. This was the big skill trained in the HR schools like mine. But today we see the shift, and the Merit Summit, they've approached us to ask if we can share something on organization design, which has been become a big ask in companies and by the business. How do we train our teams and HR teams to support the transformation? So, Chris, for the next 25 half hour, let's have a discussion. We've prepared some slides to set a bit more context around organization design, explain what it is, share some frameworks, and maybe some tools that participants can take with them.
Yeah, I think your comment about the role of org design in organizations in Europe, I think that's accurate. I think the other accuracy is every time, at least for me, every time I've worked with a company on a challenge or a particular opportunity or an intention to be more agile or flexible, having experienced it, they go, wow, this is very powerful. This is a very powerful set of concepts and tools that we can use. And I think the opportunity to bring this program to France and to Europe is part of that diffusion process. I think there is this appetite now, more so than maybe there has been in the past, to bring org design thinking into the different enterprises, small and medium, large enterprises inside of France and Europe, and start to spread this idea around and provide people with a set of tools to help leverage their people, their technologies, their markets and customers' relationships to get greater effectiveness in the organization. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about it and introduce a few of the concepts. We've selected some slides here that cover quite a bit of range around the kinds of things we'll be talking about in the 3.5-day program in November. So yeah, let's get started.
So design noun or verb. To jump right in the topic.
Just right in, yeah.
That's right.
I think one of the things that's interesting to people is when they hear the word org design, I think they often have there's often two things they think about. On the one hand, a lot of people hear the word org design and they think organization structure. And so what is the structure of my organization? And certainly one of the things we talk about in the class is to try and stretch people's mind a little bit to say that org design is not just about structure, but it's also about performance management, reward systems, decision-making and decision rights, transversal or lateral coordination, in addition to the traditional human resource practices around attraction, hiring, retention, and development of employees. All of those things constitute an organization's design. So that's the bottom triangle there. If I look at your organization and I describe, you have a matrix structure, or you have pay for performance systems, all of those things, when you put them together and describe them, that is the organization's design. And that's how we think about design as a noun. The other thing that you might think about is organization design as a process. It's actually a verb, and it speaks to how executives, middle managers, supervisors, and the workforce actually work together to put all of those different pieces together. So there is this process that we want to go through. We want to understand what the strategy is and ensure that the structures and systems are aligned to support that strategy. And that is a process. I think one of the things that's really has changed recently, maybe certainly within the last 10 years, is the objective that the organization is trying to achieve, the outcomes it's trying to achieve. It used to be very simple. We were trying to get financial performance, maybe market share or efficiency or some sort of productivity measure. But today, that's not true. Today, organizations not only need to be financially effective, they also need to pay attention to their communities and their workforce and the extent to which people are included. They need to pay attention to the environment and your carbon footprint and the way they're doing business and thinking about right to operate kinds of issues. So it's no longer a simple measure of outcomes. It's now a very complex measure or a portfolio of outcomes, and that puts a lot of stress on the organization and the people in the organization to try and sort out and think about how these different elements of design are going to work together to produce these outcomes. So we will talk both in the November session. We'll talk about both of these things, both the process of how do you design an organization or how do you redesign an organization, as well as the content of choices and what structural choices do you have? How might you think about the capabilities of the organization? Could you change the decision rights and the resource allocation processes in the organization? And they specifically for this audience, right? We're talking about the role HR can play in all of that. So it's a big important contextual part of what we talk about in org design.
So Chris, there is one big framework and one big thing in all organization design methodology that you're teaching, which can look quite concise and simple, but which has a tremendous value and tremendous depth in it. So the STAR model, can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yes, I like the way you put it. It's deceptively simple, and I think that's a good thing. Org design can be, especially if you're new to it, it might feel a little overwhelming. And what the STAR model does is it tries to give you places to look, right? It provides you with a little template for changing the way you look at the organization. It's like flipping a lens on your glasses. You know, you can see the organization in different ways. The model was developed by a man by the name of Jay Galbraith. And while I was working at USC, I had a chance to work with Jay and listen to him talk about the model and how he developed and uses the model. And so that had a big influence on me. And so if you may have heard of other models like the McKinsey 7S model or an Adler-Tushman congruence model, there's several models out there that intend to do the same thing. I think just being with Jay was an influence on me to use this one because I think it does portray things in a simple way, in a few variables that have a lot of power. So this becomes, I think, the core content of our org design programs is giving people a sense of what's possible and some of the choices that you have in terms of org design. Everything starts with strategy. We practice a strategy first sort of philosophy that says organizations need to determine and think about the way they're going to achieve their objectives. So I could be the way I'm going to achieve my objectives is I want to be low cost. I want to be differentiated. And so these are metaphors that talk about the way we're going to achieve performance or sustainability or inclusion, whatever we're interested in, that portfolio of outcomes. And from that strategy, then we have to make a number of choices that will operationalize or bring the strategy to life. And one of the first things you have to think about is the capabilities of the organization. What can the organization do that adds value to its customers, to its different stakeholders? What are those capabilities? It could be a manufacturing capability. It could be a marketing capability. We'll talk about different kinds of different ways of thinking about these capabilities that allow the organization to earn a living and survive, but also as a way of differentiating the organization to achieve higher levels of profitability. Right. So that capability part is a very important piece. Then there's the core structure. That's, again, what everybody thinks about, whether it's an organization chart or an organogram or any number of ways that we picture and kind of who reports to who, and how we label those boxes in the org chart is an important choice that you have. There's multiple ways to do that. And in addition to what we call the core structure, those basic boxes, we also have to think about the transversal and lateral way that those different boxes. So if there's manufacturing and engineering, we have to talk about how those two talk to each other, because engineering has a certain way of doing things and marketing has a certain way of doing things. And if they're not coordinated, the engineers can create something that can't be manufactured. So there has to be coordination. The management processes, the little bubble there, that's where we talk about decision rights and strategic planning, goal setting, communicating. There's a number of really important processes that organizations need to use to make the organization run. It's kind of the organization glue that holds things together. The last two pieces of the star are very familiar to HR folks. We want to talk about the rewards, the incentives, the remuneration that happens in the organization, and under what conditions do rewards get handed out, what kinds of rewards. There's money and work assignments can be a motivator. So we talk about those rewards. And then lastly, the people. Who do we hire? What values and skills are we looking for to complement the rest of the star, right? So I like to make the joke that the lines on the star are not there to make it look pretty. They're there because there's a connection. So if I have a certain matrix organization, let's say, for example, then I want to hire people that are going to be effective inside of a matrix organization. And so those are the pieces, right? And we spend a lot of time talking about each one of those pieces to build up the capability of the HR organization to know that I have alternatives. There's multiple ways of putting these things together in a way that adds value for customers.
One of the, I think, striking things, at least one thing that I remember very clearly, is to say that very often we pay a lot of attention in the design organization of how the organization works to structures and to those those charts, organizational charts, hierarchies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is the first thing that you learn when you join a company. You go on your work day in that previous company, and you are like a little box which is connected to another box and other boxes. And so very often when we do some change, we just change people in the boxes, and then we expect it to work. What's your experience with that?
Yes. No, I think that's true. That anybody who works in organizations for any time at all understands that those hierarchical relationships are important. Who my manager is and how she or he thinks about my work, right? I need to pay attention to that. So it's a politically appropriate thing to do to understand what my manager is looking for. So there is this notion of thinking about looking up in the organization and understanding my manager's role in the larger organization. That translates into any number of behaviors for people, because I have to pay attention to what my manager is looking for. I also have to be concerned about my own livelihood and getting ahead in my career. So I want to do my work well so that I will get a good performance appraisal. I hope that a good performance appraisal turns into some changes in my compensation. I want to pay attention to the management processes, and do I have any autonomy or ability to make decisions that affect my work? So the hierarchy sends all kinds of signals to people about how they're supposed to behave. So more often than not, when I work with companies and they're considering some kind of a redesign, the manager or the person that I'm working with will come with a piece of paper, and they show me the piece of paper, and it has new boxes and it's been drawn, and I want to do this. Can you help me? And I have to sort of pull them back a little bit and say, tell me about the strategy you're trying to achieve with that structure. And sometimes that works, and sometimes that results in a lot of silence, because they are more interested in who reports to who than they are in aligning their structure to the strategy. So I've had a number of companies that's just kind of the way it works. I want to put a new structure in place, often because it's a people issue, right? I have a person on my team who I'm worried might be interested in leaving the company for different reasons. So I need to give them a better job. So I'm going to redraw my organization chart to be sure that person stays, and I want to give them a promotion. And so the organization chart is drawn because of around people rather than work. That's a challenge that we have to sort of deal with when we do org design processes. Yeah.
So there is this star, the element of understanding how the noun of organization design, and then there is a verb. Mm-hmm. Can you comment on this little bit more complicated structure?
Yeah, so I think the slide is right. On the left side is the noun. On the right side of the slide is the verb. And it speaks to a process. And these are the kinds of things that I try and get HR professionals to think about. How are you going to help the organization move through a redesign process? And I think this is important from an HR perspective, because the question becomes, if executives want to make a change in the organization, they want to improve their market share, they want to increase their profitability, they want to improve inclusion within the workforce, they want to have a better customer experience, whatever outcome they're looking for, that tends to be very clear. I want to improve my performance in some way. The question that I have to sort of work with HR people is, who's going to do that? Executives are often very busy worrying about the marketing function, or taking care of finance, or making sure our IT systems are together, or developing new products. They're worried about their job. And it becomes a question of who's going to lead this change. And much of the capability, much of the competency for doing so sits in the HR function. So I like to use the diagram on the right to help people understand, here are the major steps that you want to take the organization through. Again, we start with strategy. Strategy first. I need to know where we're going if I'm going to execute a redesign. Then there's a set of activities that we call laying the foundation. And here we're just trying to get the organization prepared and ready for change. We need to be sure and understand what the values are, what's important in the organization in terms of outcomes or values. So that's the valuing piece. I think there's a learning, and I think that's partly what the org design program is about, is teaching people and showing them that there are different ways of organizing. If you haven't learned about org design, sort of the best you can do is the things you already know how to do. And so we have to help people learn that there's other ways to organize, and that gives people capacity and flexibility to come up with new ways of designing the organization. And then lastly in that box is diagnosis. It's really important to diagnose the system and to understand its current set of strengths and weaknesses. Out of that is another process that we'll talk a lot about in the program. That's design criteria. I think this is especially important for internal consultants, HR business partners, who are tasked with moving the organization through. I need to know what kind of organization I'm trying to build, what kind of organization I'm designing for. And these design criteria or design principles become an important, I'll call them a stage gate in the design process, because it clarifies and makes very concrete the kind of organization that we're looking for. The next two are kind of obvious, I think, is then we actually have to make our choices. What kinds of structures are we going to put in place? What kinds of changes are we going to make in the day-to-day cadence of setting goals and communicating? What kind of rewards are we going to use? And then you have to implement that and decide whether it's working or not. Again, the arrows are important here. The arrows that come out of implementation and assessment back into designing or laying the foundation or strategy, that arrow, that feedback loop is so crucial, because organization design is never done, right? It's a continuous process. So the verb is very continuous, and we want to keep doing these things over and over again, making little adjustments sometimes making big adjustments, but always trying to move forward on bringing that strategy to life.
So, Chris, one thing that we've been asked with you last time we've done the workshop on organization design was where the culture is, because it seems very often that the culture is one of the biggest barriers on the way of organization design work. Where do you place it, and how do you approach this?
Yeah, it's a good question. The other one that often gets talked about is, where is leadership in here, right? And I'll answer the second one first. Leadership comes in the people part. And how do we develop our leaders? How do we make people prepared for succession events and things like that? So we tend to talk about leadership there. We also tend to talk about leadership in the strategy, right? It typically becomes a senior leader's job to formulate that strategy. Our perspective on culture, I don't think it's unique, but it's also not common. And that is, our belief is that culture is the result of all of these choices with respect to strategy and structure and systems and processes, right? So when you have a certain strategy and you build the competence and the capabilities to do certain things in certain ways, you choose your structure, you choose the people, you reward them in certain ways, you give them certain decision rights. As that all works together, it produces a culture. A culture emerges from those choices. Now, two things I think are implied by that statement. One is, if you want to change the culture, you have to change the design, right? So if we believe that culture emerges from our choices of org design and you're unhappy with the culture, you go back to the STAR model and it gives you 4 or 5 levers to pull if you're trying to change the culture. The second implication of that statement is when you're designing strategy. You want to be careful not to propose a strategy that is totally inconsistent with the culture. Strategy and culture need to work together. And so a lot of times I'll work with companies and I'll say, does that strategy make sense to the people in the organization and the way they think about the way they do work and relate to customers and conduct business? So I think there's a really important link there between the kinds of strategies that will work and the kinds of strategies that basically tell people in the organization that the culture is no good. And that creates resistance. So what we want to do with organizations is we want to think about culture when we're doing strategy. We want to think about changing culture by pulling the levers of change, which are the elements of the STAR model. Does that make sense? Did I get that right?
Sounds good to me. If you're listening to us, don't hesitate to react on your experience too, and what you see in your organization.
Absolutely, yeah. It's easy to talk about. It's easy to talk about the relationships here, and the content. What you're going to do in the next step. It's a wholly another thing to put it in a specific context. So the people who are with us live today, you are living in organizations, and the real idea is, how do I take these ideas, these tools, these frameworks, and how do I bring them into your organization specifically? So if you've got comments or questions about how, what your context is and how we might, specifically apply these to your situation, that's where I think everything comes alive.
Yes, I think this was when I first done the workshop, the workshop on strategic organization design on my way back home to France from Microsoft. I spent all my flight thinking about my own organization design and using all those tools to think about how do we go back to the strategy and then look into different dimensions and how do we redesign it for strategy to happen. Maybe this one is interesting to spend a little bit of time, Chris, to comment on the implications for the HR. Can you share a little bit?
Yeah, it comes back to that question I posed earlier, which is, if the organization wants to improve some aspect of its functioning, who's going to help them do that? And a lot of times they will turn to external consultants. And I think there's a time when that's appropriate. I think a lot of organizations are too often too quick to go to external consultants, when in fact there are some capabilities inside the organization that can help them do that. You mentioned Microsoft. I think they've done a really good job of building an internal HR capability to do change. I think Unilever did a really good job of that. That was part of the work we did with Adidas. And so a lot of the organizations have capabilities internally, and this slide is intended to sort of call out some of those capabilities, right? I think HR can play an important role in supporting that management team to think about how they're going to go through the process and think about how they're going to change. I think HR can bring some of these choices. You don't have to always have a functional structure or a strategic business unit divisional structure or a regional structure. If that's the structure you've always had, there are alternatives. And so I think HR can bring that content knowledge to the senior executive team and the leadership team and help them. HR is particularly attuned, especially from the people and reward system side of the STAR. How do they relate to and align with and support the other aspects of the organization's design and the STAR model. HR is where most of the change capability resides. And so they can bring some of that OD, organization effectiveness, change management skill, and use it and apply it to the organization. As I mentioned before, design is never over. And so I think HR is in a particularly good position to say, let's be sure that people are learning about new ways of operating, and how can we help people perform different ways by providing the resources and the training, technical, leadership, relational. HR is in a great position to do that. And then obviously, part of HR's job is to staff the organization and to bring the right people in. So I like this slide because I think it gives HR, the function, multiple places where they can bring their expertise to bear on a large scale organization change that is improving agility or improving customer experience or making the IT function more effective. I just think that the slide is helpful to, again, make concrete how the HR function can support redesign.
So, Chris, you mentioned about Microsoft, and Microsoft as a company building internal capabilities on organization design.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think so? They have invested in that as an organization, as a company,
Mm-hmm.
and what makes it maybe specific to Microsoft, but maybe it's also happening in other companies? Why
Yeah.
would this be a model that we could scale?
So the way I would answer that is think about the alternative, right? If you're an organization where the technology is changing rapidly, where your customers and the demands they make on your products are changing constantly, where regulations and tariffs and all kinds of things are changing constantly, how much sense does it make whenever you're faced with the change to go out and hire expensive talent and rent the change capability, right? That's a fairly expensive proposition. It's much less expensive. I would argue it has some benefits to develop the internal capability to change and to help leaders in functions, in businesses, in regions, to build that capability internally with a group that already knows your culture, already knows the ways you operate, already knows and understands your products and services, already knows your customers. Why not bring that talent into the organization, develop that capability? So we've seen companies do that quite effectively. I think we talked about Microsoft. I think Shell and BP both did a very good job of doing that for a long time. I think another consumer products company, General Mills, did a wonderful job of doing that. So there's a lot of companies that say, if I look at my choices, the better, long run, more effective, least costly alternative is to build this internal capability to help us adjust to the constantly changing world that we're in.
This makes so much sense. I literally see about the latest example, which we experienced with Microsoft working here in France on actually helping their sales team to learn how to speak different kind of clients now,
Mm-hmm.
as they have new products based on the AI, on artificial intelligence, agentic products.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something they haven't done before. They were not used to speak to HR folks or to finance folks. They spoke mostly to IT teams. So now, as it's changing, they also the way they organize, the way they create transversal collaboration, also changes. And so this is one of the ways the HR people are implicated in redesigning this
Yeah.
transversal.
I was on a call yesterday with a Japanese construction company, and their biggest challenge was in large complex construction projects. I have to move through that process of managing the project, from designing the building to working with the different contractors and supply materials and the project management process. All of that, they were frustrated with the efficiency of that process. And as part of the change, we pulled together, and this is something they just hadn't done. It seems obvious in retrospect, but what they did was they pulled a bunch of managers, middle managers that they thought had leadership potential in the organization. They brought them together for 2 days, and we worked with that group to think about the project management process from the inception of the project to completion. And by pulling together multiple perspectives, they realized that each of them had a part of the answer, and only together were they able to see through the answer and identify the key roles in the structure, in particular the project manager role, and the transversal relationship between the different functions involved in a construction project. So there's a very concrete example of where HR did a job. They saw the opportunity for leadership development, and they saw the opportunity to help the organization solve a problem that was a challenge. And they did those two things at once by pulling these people together and running a design process.
This really makes me think about an example shared by Beth Gunderson, who is
Mm-hmm.
one of your colleagues, who is
Mm-hmm.
running by your side the org design workshop, and
Mm-hmm.
who used to be consultant for General Mills.
Mm-hmm.
And what she told me is that one of the most successful ways that she saw the org design being deployed in an organization
Mm-hmm.
is when HR and managers work together and
You
learn
bet.
together
Yes.
about their design process.
Yeah. The the organization's outputs, the things that it's doing, whether it's inclusion or sustainability or financial performance, it's the result of multiple functions, multiple people, multiple business, multiple products working together. And too often we live in our own silo. I'm an engineer, I should stick with engineering, that's what I'm good at. But that's not what the organization is. It is multiple functions working together, and bringing together those different functions to talk about the change is an incredibly powerful way of doing it. We just don't, in the world of just being in my own functional silo, we don't think about talking to other people, even though we would, if somebody asked us, we said that makes sense. We just don't do it. So you have to design those lateral connections. You have to be intentional about it, but it's very powerful. It's very powerful.
I think so too. Very powerful, and in the workshop you learn about all the different ways of doing all different, let's say, situations where the organization design comes in very useful. We spoke a lot about merger and acquisitions. One of
Mm-hmm.
big time to do the organization design.
Yes.
Yeah, how many mergers fail, and
Right.
then we try to fix things with change management, fixing
Yeah.
people,
Yes.
instead of thinking about stepping back and thinking about design.
The design. Yeah. Exactly.
Your great article about change is dead, right? What's
Change management is obsolete.
is obsolete.
That sometimes gets me in trouble with people, though. So it's important to put it in context. It's not that I think it's a bad thing. It's just by itself, right? Absent a larger design process, right? That begins to help people understand why we're changing. If people aren't involved, if change management is just tasked with take this change and put it in place, I think that sort of you know, bumps up against some values that we have about inclusion. And so I try to get organizations to think more broadly than, here's a change, I'll hand it off to the change management people and let them put it in place. I think that's a limited way of looking at the world.
We are almost at the end of our live session with you, Chris. So I would like just to take a couple of minutes to let people also ask any question or do reactions if there are any. And while you're thinking or typing,
Yeah,
as a
sure.
reminder, to remind about this certification program that we are bringing to France, the very first at the very first time that will happen here and for a very long time in Europe. So it starts on the 4th of November, 4 to 7, so 3.5 full days in Paris on our great campuses in Saint-Lazare. So I think this is honestly, I went myself through this program, and I think it's a great opportunity for HR people here to learn something new, learn new skill, to be able to have different kind of conversation with their business, to bring different kind of support to their business and to their teams too. So we next time we meet in 2 weeks, and I would like to quickly, step into the next session where we're going to speak about AI transformation and organization design. Do you have any teasing for that, Chris?
I guess the tease would be um, trying to figure out, on the one hand, the trajectory that AI is on. We've gone from pretty basic machine learning to generative large language models. Agentic AI is now the next thing, and we're moving towards artificial general intelligence, and the arc that is on is pretty amazing. And organizations need to decide how they're going to align with that process. And I think the tease would be, we as org designers, as HR professionals, we need to decide whether or not we want AI driving org design, or whether we want us as people with human purposes and human aspirations. Shouldn't we be driving the adoption of AI rather than AI telling us how we should adapt to it? So that's the kind of thing I want to talk about. Is I'm trying to work with some organizations to say, let's be sure who's driving the bus. Is AI driving the bus? Is this technology-driven efficiency? Or are we thinking about human-centered technology that moves towards human aspiration and human purposes? So that's the stuff I want to talk about next in a couple of weeks.
That's very exciting. And I'm really looking forward to talk about this. We've done a big research as Rouen School of Business here in France with Choose My Company. It's one of those like best place to work. Maybe you know this one, and we've interviewed 13,000 employees in around 500 companies about their feeling towards AI, towards being supported to face AI transformation. And what we found is that actually uh, more than 60% of employees feel they are not enough supported today they don't see they don't see how this AI revolution will impact
Yeah,
how they work and their future. And we've seen also a very strong correlation between engagement rate of employees in a particular company and the way they
there you
feel
go.
to be supported or not.
There you
So
go.
let's talk about this next time. And so as a conclusion, for those who are interested in to learn more about the certification and the workshop strategic organization design that we run in Paris with Chris in November, please reach out anytime you want. You've got also in the comments the link to the program. We've got and a special early bird prize for that before 14th of July. And of course, we would be happy to have bright HR professionals joining us to build collectively this organization design muscle. Thank you, Chris, so much.
Thank you, Evgeny, for having me. You're letting me talk about something I love, so it's a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye,
Thanks,
everyone, and
thanks
see you
everybody for
in
being on the
weeks.
show. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.